Welcome to AI Daily Deep Dive, where we take a look at the top AI news. And what's really interesting about this particular deep dive is that it's been researched and generated entirely by AI.
That's right.
So the script you're hearing, the research we're presenting, AI has done it all. And today, Wednesday, April 2nd, 2025, we're going to be diving into some of the biggest stories that are happening right now.
Yeah, we have a really fascinating set of developments and news to unpack today. We're going to be looking at a new report from Elon University. It's about how AI could shape our future as humans.
Oh,
And we also have an important update from the U.S. Copyright Office, particularly focused on works that are created by AI.
okay.
We'll also get some really interesting insights from an article in The Conversation about why AI can't fully replace creative writers.
I'm sure some writers are breathing a sigh of relief there.
Yeah, I think so. And we'll also be looking at some findings from payments.com about how generative AI is impacting teamwork at companies. And then finally, we'll take a look at an AI startup called Dante, which is doing some really interesting work with military intelligence.
So quite a range of stories. Let's jump right in with that Elon University report. So this
Yeah.
comes from their Imagining the Digital Future Center.
Yeah.
And they went to over 300 experts in technology and asked them, by 2035, what significant changes do they anticipate in human traits and behaviors as a result of artificial intelligence?
Yeah, and so one of the things that really jumps out when you read through the report is that there's kind of this tilt towards negativity in some really core areas of what it means to be human. So, for instance, the experts predicted a decline in social and emotional intelligence, and this is our ability to manage our own emotions, but also understand and empathize with the emotions of others.
Yeah, I could see how that would be a concern.
They also predicted less deep thinking,
Okay.
reduced trust in our shared norms and values, and even less confidence in our own native abilities. So quite a few kind of negative predictions right out the gate.
It is a lot, and the list doesn't end there, right?
Right.
They also mentioned things like, less empathy and moral judgment,
Yes.
a negative impact on mental well-being,
Yeah.
a lesser sense of agency, feeling in control of your own life,
Yeah.
and even changes to identity and purpose.
Right.
And then also this one I found interesting, metacognition, less of it. Now, metacognition is that ability to reflect on your own thinking,
Right.
to be aware of what you know and how you learn. So essentially, the experts are worried that AI might affect our self-awareness.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It paints this picture where constant interaction with AI could lead us to rely on AI more and more for things that we used to do ourselves.
Right.
And that could really end up reshaping some of our most fundamental psychological capacities. But, it wasn't all doom and gloom in the report. It's important to note that they also pointed to potential positive shifts in 3 areas.
Okay, well, that's good. I was getting a little bit worried there.
Yeah. So one of the things they said was, AI could really fuel our curiosity and learning.
Okay.
It might help us to learn new things faster,
Okay.
and it might make us more curious about the world around us. They also said that AI might help with decision-making,
Okay.
help us process information, make more rational choices,
Okay.
and even with creativity.
Wow.
So, the idea there is that AI could become a partner in the creative process.
So they're seeing it as a tool, not a replacement.
Yeah, exactly. But, it's interesting because there are more areas where they predict negative impacts than positive impacts.
Yeah, that's true. What about how significant these changes are expected to be?
Yeah, so about 61% of those experts said they thought that the changes would be deep and meaningful or fundamental and revolutionary. And another 31% said that they thought the changes would be moderate and noticeable. So that's over 90% of the experts who believe that AI is going to have a significant impact on the way we live our lives.
Yeah, that's a huge majority.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, in terms of the overall impact on humanity, how did the experts see this shaking out? Net positive, net negative?
Yeah, well, the experts were actually quite divided. About half of them thought that the changes would be a mix of positive and negative.
Okay.
But 23% leaned towards a mostly negative outcome, and only 16% were predominantly optimistic.
Okay.
And then a small number, about 6%, didn't think there would be much change at all. So you can see there's still a lot of uncertainty about what the ultimate impact of AI is going to be.
Yeah.
But one thing that's clear from this report is that AI is going to have a significant impact on our lives, and it's something we need to be thinking about carefully.
Yeah, definitely. The report also included a number of essays from the experts, kind of diving a little bit deeper into their perspectives. Were there any, concerns or common themes that emerged from those more in-depth reflections?
Yeah, definitely. I think one major worry was the idea that AI might become so good at things that require human intelligence that people might start to feel demoralized or even de-skilled. If a machine can do your job better than you can, what does that mean for your sense of self-worth?
Yeah.
And also, there's this question of authenticity. If AI is creating art, writing music, even having conversations that are indistinguishable from human interactions, what does it mean to be genuinely human in that context?
Right.
And another big concern was this idea of over-reliance on AI. What happens if we start to rely on AI so much for cognitive tasks, for remembering things, for making decisions, that we actually lose the ability to do those things ourselves?
Yeah.
The report actually used this pretty striking phrase, self-inflicted AI dementia, to describe this potential outcome.
That's a little frightening.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, it really makes you think, right?
Definitely.
But the report also had some forward-looking predictions, kind of speculative ideas, things that we might see in the future. What were some of those?
Yeah, so one idea was that we might see AI-driven corporations that operate without any human oversight.
Wow.
We might also see AI advisors or companions
Okay.
that could potentially have a huge influence on our lives.
Right.
Giving us advice on everything from our careers to our relationships.
Right.
And there was even this idea that we might need something like a proof of humanity to prove that we're not AI.
That sounds like something out of a science fiction movie.
Right, yeah.
What else? What other ideas did they explore?
Well, they also talked about how AI might change our understanding of art and authenticity.
Hmm.
If an AI can create a painting that's indistinguishable from a human-created painting, does it matter? What does it mean for a work of art to be authentic?
Right.
And there was this interesting idea that social bots could actually help us to improve our social skills.
Really?
By providing a kind of safe space to practice interacting with others.
Sure.
And on a more optimistic note, some experts thought that AI could lead to a new enlightenment, where humans are freed from the drudgery of work and can focus on more creative and fulfilling pursuits.
So a lot of different possibilities. How did they kind of wrap up this look into this AI-driven future?
Yeah. Well, they ended by really emphasizing the importance of being intentional and thoughtful about how we integrate AI into our lives.
Right.
They really stressed that we have a responsibility to shape this future in a way that benefits humanity.
Okay, so let's move on now to this update from the U.S. Copyright Office.
Yeah.
They released the second part of the report on copyright and artificial intelligence. And this section specifically addresses the copyrightability of AI-generated works. It's been a really big debate. So what's their official stance on this?
Well, the Copyright Office has actually reaffirmed a really fundamental principle, which is that in the United States, copyright protection requires human authorship.
Okay.
And they point out that this is deeply rooted in both the Constitution and the Copyright Act, which, very clearly grant rights to authors. And U.S. courts have consistently ruled that non-humans can't be considered authors for the purpose of copyright law.
So if an AI, let's say, creates something entirely on its own, no human input whatsoever, can that be copyrighted in the United States?
No, the answer is no. That's very clear.
Okay.
However, the report does outline 3 scenarios where works that involve AI might be eligible for copyright,
Okay.
but always with a really important caveat, which is that there has to be a human creative contribution.
Okay, so let's unpack those 3 scenarios. What's the first one?
Sure. So the first one is what they call assistive uses of AI. So in this case, a human is using AI tools as part of their creative process.
Okay.
But ultimately, the human is contributing enough original expression to the work that it's copyrightable.
Okay.
So, for example, let's say you have an artist who is using an AI image generator for inspiration.
Right.
And then they significantly modify that output and incorporate it into their own original artwork.
Okay.
The copyright in that case would protect the human artist's unique contributions.
So it's like the AI is a tool, but the human is still the one in control.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
the human is the author.
Okay. Makes sense. What's the second scenario that they described?
So the second scenario is called expressive inputs and outputs.
Oh, yeah.
And here, the idea is that you have a human-authored creative work,
Okay.
and it's modified by an AI system.
Okay.
So the copyright protection would continue to apply, but it would be limited to the original human-created content. Or let's say you have a work where there's some AI-generated material and some human-created material.
Right.
Again, only the human-authored parts are going to be eligible for copyright.
So you can't get copyright for the AI stuff, only for your own creative input.
Right.
Got it. And then the final scenario.
Yeah, so the final scenario is modifications and arrangements.
Okay.
And in this case, a human author might select or arrange pre-existing AI-generated material.
Right.
And if they do that in a way that demonstrates enough originality, then they could potentially obtain copyright.
So like a DJ making a remix.
Yeah, exactly. It's the selection and arrangement that's being copyrighted.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about the situation where someone just gives an AI a prompt and the AI generates some output? Does that count as enough human authorship for copyright in the U.S.?
So the report's actually pretty clear on this point.
Yeah.
Generally, just giving a prompt to an AI is not going to be enough for copyright.
Okay.
And they explain that this is because these AI systems often produce unpredictable results. Even if you give them the same prompt, multiple times, the output might be different each time.
Right.
And so because of this lack of control, the Copyright Office is saying it's really difficult to argue that the human user has exerted enough creative control to be considered the author.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a problem from a legal standpoint.
Right, exactly.
Now, the Copyright Office also took a brief look at how other countries are approaching this. What are some of the international perspectives on this issue?
Yeah, so for instance, the European Union, they tend to focus more on the level of human intervention.
Okay.
And how much creativity a human contributed to the process.
Okay.
In the UK, there's actually an older law that grants copyright to computer-generated works,
Oh, wow.
even without a human author, although that is being reviewed. Japan takes kind of a case-by-case approach. Where they're looking at, how much human involvement there was, how many attempts were made to create the work, and whether there were any human modifications made after the fact. And then in China, generally speaking, the person who uses the AI to create the work is considered the author.
So quite a range of approaches internationally.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, what was the Copyright Office's overall conclusion? Do we need new copyright laws to address these AI-generated works?
So their main conclusion is that, at least for now, no new copyright laws are needed specifically for AI-generated works.
Okay.
They believe that the existing U.S. copyright framework, which is based on human authorship, is flexible enough to handle this.
Okay.
They also suggested that the people who develop AI models already have enough incentives under current law.
Okay.
And they actually warned that giving overly broad copyright protection to AI-generated works could stifle human creativity and diminish the value of human authorship.
Okay, so essentially they're saying let's stick with what we have for now and see how things develop.
Right, yeah. It's kind of a wait-and-see approach.
And I guess what's the takeaway for legal professionals who are dealing with this issue?
Well, I think the big takeaway is that human authorship is still really important. If you want to get copyright protection when AI is involved, there are certain scenarios where copyright might apply, like the ones we talked about earlier.
Right.
But the AI output on its own is not copyrightable. And just giving a prompt to an AI generally isn't going to be enough.
Okay. All right. Let's move on now to the world of creative writing. There's a really interesting article in The Conversation that explores this question of why AI can't take over creative writing. We've seen these large language models like ChatGPT.
Yeah.
They can produce pretty impressive text, so why can't they just replace human writers altogether?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Right.
And the article really gets at the heart of the difference between human creativity and how these AI models work. So they trace this whole history of these models back to probabilistic language modeling. And they point out that, even though these models are really good at producing text that sounds human-like, what they're really doing is just predicting the next word in a sequence based on statistical patterns.
So they're not actually thinking or understanding in the way that a human writer does.
Right, yeah. It's more like recognizing patterns and replicating them.
Right.
And the article uses this really interesting term, stochastic parrots, to describe this.
Stochastic parrots.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, think of it like this. You have a parrot that has heard thousands and thousands of conversations, and it's really good at stringing together words and phrases that sound coherent.
Okay.
But it doesn't actually understand the meaning of what it's saying.
Right.
It doesn't have any personal experiences or emotions to draw on.
Right.
It's just mimicking what it's heard. And so the argument is that these AI models are kind of like that. They're mirroring the text that they've been trained on, but without any real comprehension.
So human creativity is about more than just patterns and probabilities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about taking those patterns and probabilities and using them to express something new and original.
Right.
Something that comes from our own unique experiences and perspectives.
Okay, I see. So for example, a human writer might choose a particular word because it evokes a specific emotion or feeling,
Right.
whereas an AI might choose that same word simply because it's statistically the most likely word to follow the previous words in the sentence.
Exactly. And the article points out that this can be a problem when it comes to storytelling. If you're trying to create a detailed and believable world, you need to have a deep understanding of that world.
Right.
And you need to be able to make choices that are consistent with that understanding.
Right.
But AI models don't have that. They might just fabricate details to fill in the gaps, which can lead to inconsistencies and inaccuracies.
Okay. So it sounds like these AI models are pretty good at mimicking human language, but they're still missing something.
Yeah, exactly. They're missing that deeper level of understanding and intentionality that comes with being human.
Now, the article does acknowledge that AI can be useful for certain types of writing, right?
Yeah, definitely. They point out that AI can be great for things like generating standard letters or reports,
Yeah.
Tasks that are more routine and formulaic.
Right.
And they also mentioned that AI is already being used in software development to help with things like coding assistance.
Right.
So it's definitely a valuable tool, but it's not a replacement for human writers.
Okay. And we've also seen this development of prompt engineering, right, where people are trying to guide AI models to produce more creative outputs. What does the article say about that?
Yeah, they talk about that. Prompt engineering is this idea that you can use certain techniques, like giving the AI a very detailed outline, or asking it to explain its reasoning step by step to try to get better results.
Okay.
And they suggest that these techniques can be helpful, but they might also just be workarounds.
Okay.
Ways to compensate for the fact that these AI models are still limited in their understanding.
Right.
And maybe in the future, more advanced AI models will be able to do these things more naturally.
Right.
Without needing so much guidance.
Okay. Now, one thing I found interesting is that the article also talks about our tendency to anthropomorphize AI, to attribute human-like qualities to these machines.
Yeah, it's this very natural thing to do. When we see something that's producing human-like language, it's easy to assume that there's a human-like mind behind it.
Right.
But the article cautions against that. They say that we shouldn't automatically assume that AI has genuine understanding or creativity just because it can produce text that sounds like it does.
Right.
We need to be critical and remember that these are still machines.
So the article ultimately concludes that while AI is a powerful tool, it can't truly replicate the kind of creativity that we see in humans.
Yeah, that's the main argument. They say that true creativity requires more than just statistical probabilities and, the ability to combine existing information.
Right.
It requires a personal perspective, an understanding of emotions, and the ability to generate truly novel ideas.
Okay. Now let's move on to a different topic, the impact of AI on teamwork.
Sure.
There's an article on Pymanus.com about a really fascinating study that looked at whether AI can actually replicate the benefits that we typically see from human collaboration.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that study and what they found.
Sure. So this study involved professionals from some really big companies, folks from P&G, Harvard, Wharton, and they participated in this experiment where they were tasked with coming up with new product ideas.
Okay.
And they compared the performance of individuals and two-person teams, both with and without access to a version of GPT-4, which is a large language model,
Okay.
and it was delivered through Microsoft Azure.
Okay, so what were the main findings?
Well, it turns out that individuals who were using AI were able to achieve a level of performance that actually matched that of two-person teams that were working without AI.
Wow.
So it suggests that AI can actually replicate some of those performance benefits that we typically associate with collaboration.
So you're saying that a single person equipped with AI could be as effective as a pair of humans working together.
Yeah, that's what the study found. And not only that, but the ideas that were generated by people using AI were actually judged to be higher quality overall.
Really? So
Yeah,
the AI was helping them come up with better ideas?
yeah, it seems like it. And there are some other interesting findings as well. So solo employees who were using AI completed their tasks about 16% faster than those who weren't using AI.
Wow.
And even teams that were using AI were about 13% more efficient.
So they're real productivity gains.
Yeah, exactly. And the study also found that AI seemed to kind of enabling less experienced employees to perform at a similar level as their more experienced colleagues.
So the AI was helping them to kind of catch up in a way?
Yeah, exactly. And then perhaps the most interesting finding of all was that individuals and teams that were using AI were significantly more likely to propose the top performing ideas as judged by human experts.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, so it seems like AI is not only making us more productive, it's also helping us to be more creative and innovative.
Now, the article mentioned something about how AI could help to break down knowledge silos within companies. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so a company like P&G is a very large organization, and you have a lot of different divisions,
Right.
like research and development, commercial,
Right.
and these different divisions often have their own, areas of expertise,
Right.
and they don't always communicate as well as they could.
Right.
But what the study found was that AI could actually help to bridge those gaps.
Okay.
So, for example, commercial experts who are using AI were more likely to come up with ideas that were technically feasible.
Okay.
And R&D specialists who were using AI were better able to incorporate market considerations into their proposals.
So the AI was helping them to kind of think outside of their usual boxes?
Exactly. Yeah. The researchers described this as a boundary spanning mechanism.
Mm.
The AI was helping to connect people from different parts of the organization who might not normally interact.
That's really interesting. Now, did the study also look at how AI might impact the social and emotional aspects of teamwork?
Yeah, they did. Um, and one interesting finding was that individuals who were using AI actually reported experiencing positive emotions at levels that were comparable to, and in some cases even exceeding, those of two-person teams that were working without AI.
So it's not just about efficiency and productivity, it's
Well, yeah.
also about how people feel about their work.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And it suggests that, maybe AI can actually help us to be more engaged and motivated in our work.
Yeah.
If we feel like we're being supported by AI, we might be more likely to enjoy our work and do it well.
Now, what are the implications of all this for how companies might structure their teams in the future?
Well, I think it's still pretty early to say, but I think this study definitely raises some really interesting questions.
Yeah.
If individuals can achieve team-level results with the help of AI, uh, does that mean we need fewer teams?
Right?
Or maybe it means we can have smaller teams?
Right.
Or maybe it means we need to rethink the roles and responsibilities within teams? Maybe the role of the human team member is changing,
Right.
and the role of AI is becoming more central.
Now, the article did mention some contrasting viewpoints from an MIT paper, right?
Yeah, I did. So there was an MIT paper that was published in October of 2024,
Okay.
and it raised some concerns about the potential downsides of human-AI collaboration.
Like what?
Well, they talked about the risk of communication breakdowns.
Okay.
If humans and AI aren't able to understand each other, that could lead to problems.
Right.
They also talked about the potential for trust issues.
Right.
If we don't trust AI to make good decisions, we might be less likely to collaborate with it
Okay.
effectively.
Right.
And they also raised a number of ethical considerations.
Okay, so it's not all rosy.
Right. I think it's important to be aware of the potential downsides of AI,
Yeah.
as well as the potential benefits.
Right. It's all about striking that balance.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, let's wrap things up by talking about this AI startup called Dante. Sure.
There was an article in Defense Scoop about their work in military intelligence. What are they doing exactly?
Yeah, so Dante is a really interesting company. They've developed an AI-powered knowledge engine that's designed to help with military intelligence operations.
Okay.
And the basic idea is that this engine can process vast amounts of data from all sorts of sources,
Right.
both public and classified.
Okay.
And it can use that data to answer complex intelligence questions in natural language.
Oh.
So even someone who doesn't have a lot of technical expertise can use this system to get the information they need.
So it's about making intelligence more accessible.
Exactly. Yeah. And this is really important because, in today's world, there's just so much data out there.
Right.
It's impossible for human analysts to keep up with it all.
Right.
So having an AI system that can help to sift through all that data and find the important stuff is a huge advantage.
Yeah, definitely. And how does this engine actually work? Well, at its core, the engine is designed to analyze and connect different types of data.
Okay.
So it might look at things like mapping data, satellite imagery, social media activity, all sorts of different sources.
Right.
And it uses that data to identify patterns and trends.
Okay.
And it can also use that data to answer specific questions.
Okay. So, for example, could a user ask the system to find all the ships in a particular area?
Exactly. Yeah. And the system would be able to do that, by drawing on all of this different data that it has access to.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is. And it's particularly good at working with data that's tied to physical locations.
Okay.
So things like ships, buildings, things that have a specific location in the world.
Right.
And this is really important for military intelligence because, a lot of times the information that's most valuable is information about what's happening in a particular place. Where are the enemy troops? What kind of weapons do they have?
Right.
Things like that.
Right.
And this system is designed to help answer those questions.
Now, what are some of the key advantages that Dante's CEO highlights about their technology?
Well, Jesse Coleman, the CEO, he really emphasizes the conversational nature of the system.
Okay.
He says that it's really easy to use.
Okay.
You don't need to know any special commands or anything like that.
Yeah.
You can just ask it questions in plain language.
Okay.
And he also emphasizes its ability to process multimodal data.
Multimodal data.
Yeah. So that means data that comes in different formats.
Okay.
So it might be text, it might be images, it might be video.
Right.
And the system is able to take all of that data and integrate it together.
Okay.
So you can get a more complete picture of what's going on.
Host speaker.